King of the Hill's outstanding 15th season continues with an episode that is sure to get audiences clucking. This one brings Boomhauer to the forefront, focusing on his relationship with his girlfriend's son, Luke Jr., and loops in a bit of social commentary on trans athletes through a rooster cawing competition of all things. Yep, it's the King of the Hill trans chicken episode. It also gives us, I think, a pretty subversive Bobby and Connie story and their first real fight as a couple. Overall, this thing has a lot to talk about, so let's dive into King of the Hill season 15, episode 7, Hank Ruffles Some Feathers. And like last year, I'll not only be covering every episode of the season, but I'll have my uncut reactions to each episode posted over on my Patreon as well. Check those out if it interests you. Thanks. Hank Ruffles Some Feathers does quite a few things I really like. For one, I'm so glad we're getting some Boomhauer focus here in the revival. He's always been a fun character, but honestly across the entire 13 season original run, you can probably count the Boomhauer plotlines on one hand. Last season started to explore him trying out fatherly duties with Luke Jr. via soccer refereeing, but honestly he failed pretty hard at that one. But this episode finally properly introduces us to Luke Jr.'s mom and Boomhauer's girlfriend, Wanda. It feels like it maybe took a bit too long to me. I honestly thought they might be doing a sort of running gag where we never meet her or learn her name, a real Maris and Frasier situation. We previously had only seen her in the intro sequence and she had a mask covering her face there, and in the previous episode right before this one, Boomhauer refers to her as Luke Jr.'s mom, which, as I mentioned in that video, I presume is simply because we had not learned her name yet as the audience, but maybe this is proof that they should have introduced her a bit sooner. And while this episode does give us a much better idea of what her whole deal is, it also kind of pushes her out of the picture for most of the episode. So I really hope they expand her role a bit in the revival after this. I'm actually really curious to see what Boomhauer is like as a boyfriend. It feels like this big new thing they established, but have kind of skirted any exploration of. And even this is more about Boomhauer's relationship with Luke Jr. than it is Wanda.
I hope this week will help you to, connect before this gets more serious.
Okay, I understand adding the stakes here with this comment, but I think they canonically moved in together during COVID lockdown. This should mean they've been living together for like 4 or 5 years at this point. Kind of crazy to drop the before this gets more serious thing now. I actually do think there could have been something interesting to explore there with couples who moved in with each other too early because of lockdown and navigating that relationship after the world opened back up. But that's a tangent for another season perhaps. As for this one, the thing I definitely liked most about it was Boomhauer sort of learning how to be a father figure to Luke. Initially sort of strictly sticking to Wanda's obsessively long list of no-nos for her son, but learning through Hank that being a role model and father figure actually requires showing initiative, authority, and connection. And I guess doing that through Hank was a bit of a creative workaround for Boomhauer's whole dialect. But they do incorporate Hank in a mostly natural way, particularly at first. There's this moment I love after Dale steals all the Hill's eggs and gifts them chickens in return. Hank seems upset at first, but the way his tone and expressions shift positively as he describes all the stuff he'd have to do to construct a chicken coop.
That would take a trip to the lumber yard. We'd have to size it, saw it, stain it.
God, that is just a perfect Hank Hill moment, isn't it? But like I said, the real highlight here is the Luke Jr. and Boomhauer stuff, and Hank slowly encouraging Boomhauer to let Luke Jr. do more. For the most part, we've really just seen Luke Jr. on his phone. I guess we also saw him play soccer, and there was that one episode where he sort of copied Boomhauer because he thought he was cool, which was cute, but putting a focus on their potential connection is a nice move for this revival scenario.
Yeah, dang old cool, man.
Luke Jr. takes a liking to a chicken that he names Bertrude, and with Hank's encouragement, Boomhauer has him join the Future Farmers of America, which is where we get to the sort of social commentary aspect of this episode, which is admittedly a bit of a difficult line to walk for this show, given the characters we follow and how they all live in suburban Texas. And I am not sure that I've really made up my mind about how I think they handled this one. I'm a little torn. I do think that the story here is well intentioned, but by sort of trying to straddle the line, it made the commentary feel a little muddied, at least in my opinion. But they discover that Bertrude went through this physical change where she took on rooster characteristics, which, first of all, was fascinating to learn about. It's a real thing that happens very rarely, but yeah, I just had no idea. Props to them for actually educating the audience on a genuinely fascinating phenomenon. The Future Farmers instructor here suggests they enter Bertrude in the rooster cawing competition after this. I do see on paper how this may have felt like it could have been the right entry point for the commentary here, which ultimately sort of circles around the subject of trans athletes. Basically some parents throw a fit because Bertrude isn't a quote-unquote real rooster, and this is really the only place where they make that direct comparison, with the parents also complaining about kids learning radical gender ideology. As you might expect, Hank was pretty consistently Hank when they lobbed these accusations at him as well.
The lady from the FFA said it was a rare 1 in 10,000 event that happened to this hen, and I thought it was interesting.
This ultimately leads to Boomhauer and Luke Jr. entering Bertrude in the competition anyways, and Boomhauer making this impassioned plea for people to set aside their differences. It was in Boomhauer speak, but more or less he makes the case that the common theme with everyone involved here is that parents are trying to protect their kids, that the fear and anger and overreach from the parents surrounding Bertrude entering the competition is because they want their kids to have a fair shot. They're trying to protect them, which ties to the whole Luke Jr. storyline of Wanda being a bit overprotective herself. And I get it, that is sort of King of the Hill's MO, to try and see and understand different perspectives and find common ground. But for me, this one just felt like you could see them sort of circling around the subject instead of earnestly engaging with it. And that makes it feel a little hollow to me. I think I appreciate the attempt, and as I said, I think it was well intentioned. But the sort of half measure left me a little dissatisfied with it, personally. Trans athletes are really demonized now more than ever, despite the fact that there are 0 trans athletes in any major professional American sports. Like, the people who are anti-trans athletes have by all accounts achieved what they want, and yet they still continue to make it this hot button issue. Right now, we've got former NBA players entering the WNBA draft in embarrassing publicity stunts, drawing attention to a quote-unquote problem that does not exist. Almost as though the real intention isn't to protect the women's sports that these people otherwise wouldn't care about. It's actually about othering and belittling an already marginalized group of people. End of woke rant. In the end, Bertrude came in 3rd place in the rooster cawing competition, and I believe Riley Gaines came in 5th. The whole rooster competition storyline honestly wasn't even a huge part of the episode. It was sort of just the conduit for the Boomhauer connecting with Luke Jr. storyline, as they tried to show Wanda that she was being a bit overprotective, and that is the stuff that I think really works. The subplot to this episode is another completely separated one, with a Bobby and Connie focused story, and this was really more about Connie than Bobby, which I really appreciated. Connie has to do an on-campus job for class credit and decides to take up the mascot position because she thinks it will be easy. And I think this is a really great scenario to put Connie in. She's obviously somebody who super prioritizes intellectual work and thinks pretty highly of herself when it comes to her studies. And so it makes a lot of sense that she might trivialize and underestimate the work that goes into being a mascot. And of course, Bobby, having the experience of having been a mascot, tries to warn her that it isn't so simple. She kind of writes him off. Connie is super smart and successful, so I appreciate a story that really pushes her out of her comfort zone, and I particularly like where they land with it in terms of her personal journey, but we'll get there in a bit. This episode also shows the lengths Bobby goes to be a good boyfriend. After Connie fails miserably her first time out as a mascot, he goes to try and give her a pep talk at halftime, and honestly, seeing her crying under the mascot head was pretty brutal. It made a lot of sense to me that Bobby would be willing to take her spot to try and show her the ropes. For one, Bobby is not one to turn down an opportunity to perform, but 2, it's really hard to see her significant other through that level of hurt and embarrassment. But admittedly, this is an episode where Connie's behavior becomes really frustrating. I do think the level of scrutiny thrown at her from fans over the revival has been pretty embarrassing. Please spare me with the Connie is for the streets bullshit, but this is an episode where Connie's shortcomings really lead her to lash out and treat Bobby poorly. And I do appreciate that it is at least rooted in her own insecurities that are then addressed and worked on by the end of the episode. But man, she really takes Bobby for granted in a frustrating way here. She basically just keeps letting Bobby take her place, insisting that she needs the example over and over again, when in reality, she fully stops paying attention and focuses on her studies instead. One of my favorite parts of this subplot is that Joseph actually ends up being a pretty great source of insight for Bobby's predicament. While I have loved Joseph in the revival due to his performance and the way they've elevated him as comedic relief, it does feel like comedic relief ends up being his primary use. So this was refreshing. Joseph basically compared what Bobby was doing for Connie to when he was the quarterback and they used to have smarter kids take math tests for him.
I still think it's a pretty good analogy.
It was nice to see Joseph's experience provide Bobby with actual perspective, even if he didn't quite take it seriously at first. I think there's a real opportunity in this revival to expand Joseph's character a bit further, and this was a nice step towards that. But Bobby does eventually come to terms with the fact that Connie is kind of using him, and it's hard not to be pretty turned off by the way she treats him.
I have a restaurant to run.
Bobby, this is serious. I
I have thermodynamics on Monday.
For Connie to come to the restaurant that Bobby runs and tell him that he has to get serious because she has tests is without a doubt one of the most tone-deaf and rude things we've ever seen her do. Something that feels profoundly selfish for the character. But I did really appreciate where this landed for Connie, and that it was Bobby who realized and recognized what it might be that she's dealing with internally.
The only thing I ever saw her suck at was being a mascot.
I think this is a pretty great insecurity to imbue in young adult Connie. One thing we know all too well is that for her entire life, Min and Con had outrageously high expectations of Connie, whether that came to school or extracurricular activities or even who she dated, and she really rose to the occasion for everything she sunk time and effort into. I actually think not knowing or understanding how to fail makes a lot of sense as a struggle for Connie. She's rarely had to actually sit with or understand the feeling of not being good at something. And here we're seeing that she actually sort of fears that experience. She doesn't know how to cope with those feelings. Obviously, it isn't an excuse for her behavior, but it is an explanation for why she was lashing out at Bobby. And honestly, I appreciated seeing Bobby and Connie actually have a fight as a couple. It was really the first fight we've seen them have as a couple, and they reflected on it and resolved everything stronger than they started. Bobby's pep talk to her is such a fun subversion. Your typical pep talk trope is the thing that will lead to someone finally getting it together and succeeding at something they'd been failing at. But here, he's pep talking her into failing. Really fun stuff. And Connie actually seeing somebody she loves be proud of her because she did a bad job has to have been healing given those years of exacting and strict expectations. Overall, I do think this episode had a lot of great stuff going for it. It was nice to bring Boomhauer a bit closer to the forefront of a story, particularly through the new revival developments that we've maybe not seen enough of, though I do hope that Wanda gets a lot more focus moving forward. And while I did appreciate their attempt to have commentary on transphobia in sports, I think their efforts to bring in the parallel issue with Bertrude maybe muddied the commentary a little bit. Ultimately, I think this episode worked because of the development in the character relationships and dynamics. And that is what I've got to say about season 15, episode 7, Hank Ruffles Some Feathers. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please stay tuned because I have breakdowns for every season 15 episode on the way. Maybe even subscribe if you're interested, and also consider checking out my Patreon where you can see my uncut reactions to these episodes. Hey, I also have plenty of other King of the Hill videos across the channel if those interest you, including coverage for every single season 14 episode from last year, which I even threw into one big compilation for your viewing convenience. Stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.